Trying to get an abortion, seek an abortion, be able to employ her constitutional right to seek health care and health care that is enshrined and allowed by federal law. What he would convey to them, I don't think he's going to be giving medical advice. That's not the role of any president. He would say, but I would say he would convey to them, I have asked my team, my team to use every lever at their disposal to ensure you have this right, to ensure you have access, to ensure that you can have the ability to seek medical care in the way that every woman should have the right to across the country.
And happy Saturday, and welcome to The Deal. It is Saturday, September 4th, 2021. And, if you were in with us last week, we had a great show with Robert P. Jones, Dr. Robert P. Jones, and we talked about his excellent book, White Too Long. So we really appreciated him last week. We'll be having more guests, but it's a holiday weekend. It's a Labor Day weekend, so we decided not to bring in a guest. But I did decide that we're going to have our regular Val Atkinson here. Hey, Val, welcome back to The Deal.
Hello, Ed. Thank you so much. Glad to be here, buddy.
Well, Val, last week's show, I've gotten so much positive feedback about that show. And one of the things we try to do is bring in people who know what they're talking about. And that recommendation was your recommendation for Robert P. Jones to be on The Deal last week. So I really appreciate you turning me on to that book and eventually leading to him being on the show.
Sure.
Well, let's get started with this week's news. There's so much to talk about. There always is. The first thing on my list here is Texas and the Texas abortion. I was going to say ban, but I'm not even sure what it is, Val. It's not classically, it's not a law because it doesn't have any government enforcement in it, right? It has you tattletelling on your neighbor who then doesn't get in trouble, but the doctor gets in trouble, or the Uber driver who drove you to the abortion gets you in trouble. What the hell exactly did Texas do? What is this Texas law about? I read it from start to finish twice. And I'm trying to figure out, is there anything else in the history of America like that piece of whatever it is?
I don't know, Ed. And basically what it reveals to me is that you have two parties, two ideologies on two separate tracks here. Republicans don't have to worry about governance or any of that because they don't do it even when they're in power. Their job is to find monkey wrenches and throw it into the system. So they're always thinking outside the box. And this is one of the products of that outside the box thinking. How can we come up with something that gums up the system? What can we do that would really defang the courts that they can't do anything about it? So we'll take a little pressure off them. Democrats, on the other hand, see their role as ensuring that the people still have confidence in the system and that the system works. So we have to do things to show them that, oh no, there's no need to get excited. Let them do it this way. It's okay if that happens. Let's try that. And it appears to the average onlooker that Democrats are weak. It appears that they are allowing the right-wingers to get away with almost murder. Now, they didn't get away with everything in this case yet, because there is no enforcement arm for the state to take up in this bill that they just passed. It's a civil piece that citizens can get around the whole thing that you and I learned in civics classes, Ed, in school, a little simple thing called standing. And, that's the first thing that hit me. Where does your next door neighbor, how does your next door neighbor have standing when it comes to your teenage daughter getting an abortion? How can they prove that it harms them and it should be thrown out of court right away? But the Republicans were successful in their initial task or challenge to find another monkey wrench to throw into the system to gum up the works. This was a good one.
Yeah, it certainly is. But I guess the other troubling thing for me, amongst the many things with this, is that the Supreme Court of the United States, in not really hearing the case fully, and just sort of letting it go, what they're terming the shadow docket, right? The Supreme Court can on an emergency basis hear a case or not hear a case, or issue an opinion and having not had any oral arguments on it. And normally it's only supposed to be in emergency situations. I don't know how this ranks as an emergency. Like I said, there is, or for them to enact this ban in the first place, I started looking, and obviously abortion has gone down in sheer numbers since the 1970s. There were about 600,000 abortions throughout the entire country, of a country of 320 some million people. One abortion is too many for some people, but abortion is, I think, the choice between the woman and her doctor, and her family, and her conscience, and her religion, and not our religion. There's no state religion in the United States. And a lot of the terminology and the way, it was argued in the Texas legislature, I went back and looked, and they talked a lot about religious themes. We just, and we're going to talk about Afghanistan later, but we just left there, and there's a group there called the Taliban. And it seems to me that every time I hear somebody talk about the Middle East, they talk about Sharia law and how, religion should not be able to influence the law. But doesn't this seem like the same thing to you, that this is sort of an equivalence here?
It is the exact same thing. Under Sharia law, the Taliban wants people to do exactly what Sharia law says religiously. And what these people are doing, these I don't want to use a confusing analogy here, but people that are against abortions, they tie this into their religious bent, and they want everybody to be forced or mandated to follow their religion, Christianity, as it relates to abortion. And then they step out of that caste or that mold and say that the Taliban is 100% wrong by forcing people to adhere to Sharia law. It's six in one hand and half a dozen in the other, Ed. It's the same thing.
But Val, it sort of reminds me of the conversation we had with Robert Jones last week about the not even religious white, but the white church, for lack of a better term, people like the Baptists and people coming from that bent, seeing everything in terms of it has to be their way or no way, and that's how we find ourselves here. But there's a real problem with that. It has leaked over into law. Now, the Supreme Court has made a decision, even if it's kind of mushy, right? And they hate to go, they always cite precedent and saying that they can't go back and change stuff because there's a precedent about this, that, or other. So let's segue real quick then into what this means in terms of the court. The Republicans have figured out that the court's sort of way to do this thing. If Mitch McConnell isn't the speaker anymore, or the leader anymore of the Senate, he doesn't really care all that much because he won the battle over the courts. He has all these federal court officers, and they got additional seats on the Supreme Court. So you get an Amy Coney Barrett, a Gorsuch, and those people onto the court. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't even cold yet before they had Amy Coney Barrett ready for the court. What does this mean in terms of what's going to happen on other issues other than abortion, because it seems like they got their victory on abortion. So where are they going to go next?
There's a lot of places they could go in. They could deal with guns. They could deal with climate control. There's a lot of places they could go to try to make things happen. My concern, though, is on the other side of this piece is what's the Democrats' reaction to all of this? And it appears to me at this particular time that Democrats are kind of skittish, and they don't want the average American to think that Democrats are overreaching or overreacting to things such as increasing the courts. You mentioned that Mitch McConnell has put people on all three levels of the federal court, the district, the appellate, and of course the Supreme Court that we watch quite closely. But Democrats have to have the nerve, the gonads, to go in there and increase the courts. Give you one of my analogies, Ed. It's like somebody breaking in your house, stealing all your food from your refrigerator and your freezer and your pantry. You catch them and you tell them not to do it anymore and you let them go. My question is, what about making that family whole? What about getting the food back? It's not just about punishing or making sure it doesn't happen again. What about the meals that are coming up? Let's get the food back. And that's what Democrats need to do. Here, when we talk about getting the food back, we're talking about adding seats to the district level of the federal court, adding seats to the appellate level, to the circuit courts, and adding a substantial number of seats to the Supreme Court. If Republicans want to do that and add more when they get in again, well, when we get in again, we'll do it. But we can't play this game that we can't come up with a remedy because we are afraid that the Republicans may counter that remedy. You know, you might as well just go off and cut your own throat and just save the trouble, save somebody else the trouble from doing it. It's a Democratic problem. You know, Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and Joe Biden are going to have to get together. Yeah. And I'd like to see three of them come out and says, hey, we got a big announcement to make. We apologize. We are going to kill the filibuster. We're going to pass all these bills. We're going to let Kamala Harris vote to break the tie. Right. We're going to do all of these great things. And it can be done because that's the way history is going to look at this thing, Ed. They're going to say it could have been done. It's Democrats deciding not to do it, as opposed to Republicans mandating that they can't do it.
Sure. You know, we started, want to remind the folks you're watching The Deal. This is Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. And we started out talking about the Texas abortion, whatever that monstrosity is. But really, what it shows, I think, Val, is that the Democratic Party's neglect of treating the courts as important as they are, because we already know that there's been a tremendous loss on the voting rights side by carving back the Voting Rights Act. And that now we're in the middle of redistricting in places because we have census data now, which will have a tremendous effect on 2022 in the next 10 years. And it may entrench the Republicans even further. We know that they're the minority in terms of people. We know that their policies aren't popular across the board, but they have figured out how to hang on to power. I do want to play a clip. This is Herb Joyner. He's a law professor at North Carolina Central University, talking about redistricting and the importance of redistricting.
Yeah, well, redistricting is at the heart of our movement forward right now. Every 10 years, based on the Constitution, the General Assembly in every state has to draw new lines to reflect its changing population. And in North Carolina, we have a huge increase in our population here that is going to require redrafting political lines at the city level, at the Board of Education level, at the county level, at the state level, and for congressional races as well. And
So Val, what's going to happen is that in every place in America, people are going to have to come and figure out how to apportion seats, and so they're supposed to do it equally, based on population. What is your fear, or do you have any trepidation about what's going to happen? Say right here in North Carolina, where we are, there is still Republican control in both houses there in the North Carolina legislature. What are those districts going to look like? Do you have any sense of what that's going to be?
Well, first of all, we have one additional district. We now have 14 districts to reapportion. And I think it's going to look something in the order of they're going to shoot for 11-3, maybe even 12-2. That's going to be their goal. They may pare it back, or the courts may make them pare it back. But if they have less than 8 seats on this new congressional map, I will be dumbfounded. There's no way they'll have less than 8. And as you pointed out clearly, they are in the minority as far as registration, actual count of people, any way you want to slice it. They're in the minority, but they will, the legislature, the delegation, representing North Carolina, that is the Senate and of course the House representatives in Washington, will be overwhelmingly Republican. Mm-hmm. Right now it's 80%. Republicans make up about 33% of the registered voters in North Carolina, and yet they represent about 80% of the North Carolina congressional delegation. And that is not good. But I think because of certain court cases here, to answer your question, Ruco v. Common Cause and Chiavallo versus Washington, those 2 cases right there are going to give the line drawers in the North Carolina legislature the authority to go in and try to shoot for a 12-2 majority.
Wow.
All they got to do is to make sure it's not based on race.
Yeah.
They can do that. There's a thing called packing and fracking and all of these other kind of things that they can do. So I expect them to be highly motivated to increase Republican representation.
Well, thanks a lot, Val. You ruined my day, because that is what I fear. And then you got to go through another election cycle, and another one and another one. So you're going to have to go through 5 election cycles until you get to a new census, unless something dramatic happens, like a increase in number on the Supreme Court to try to fight back some of this. Look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the March on Washington. It was the 50th anniversary of that, and it got very scant attention in the media, and we want to talk about why that is. But we also want to talk about what protests look like going forward in the rest of the 21st century. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
So we didn't just come today to have a show. Demonstration without legislation would not lead to change. We didn't come out and stand in this heat because we didn't have nothing to do. We come to let you know if we will come out by these numbers in the heat and stand in the heat, that we will stand in the polls all day long.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights. They want no reservations. They want complete equality, social, economic, and political. And no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
And welcome back to the second segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We were talking about Texas abortion. We were talking about the importance of the Supreme Court. We talked a little bit about redistricting and the impact that's going to have on our lives going forward. I want to change gears and talk about the March on Washington. You saw a clip of the original and also the one that happened the other day. Al Sharpton and Martin Luther King III were organizers of that event. And Val, you wouldn't have known it happened. I mean, I remember back, maybe 20 years ago, every time the March anniversary would come up, you would at least see clips on the news and people talking about it. But obviously, there's a lot going on. We talked about the Texas abortion. We're going to talk about Afghanistan. We're going to talk about the Hurricane Ida. We're going to talk about a lot of other things. So the news cycle was full of stuff. And so marching in Washington, having mass protests is a way to get attention. Reverend Barber recently led a caravan through West Virginia to try to get attention. It was a different kind of march in the era of COVID, right? They drove by Joe Manchin's office and blew the horns and stood outside. It's a little bit different. I guess the long way to the question is what is protesting going to look like for at least the immediate future? And why are events like a large scale march in Washington, like Al Sharpton and them conducted, less effective than it used to be?
Well, the first thing that impacts protesting is social media, and that has a double-edged impact. It can help spread the word easily and better than any network station or cable station or whatever. And at the same time, it can be a distraction from what's going on because so many people are into their phones and into online checking things out, and they don't have time to get involved in something like this. But I think what is really missing is the statue of the people that are involved. I go back to August the 28th of 1963. And during that time, in the city of New York, for an example, you had people that were really fighting for the same thing that had high stature. You had the criminal, Bumpy Johnson, who made friends with Malcolm X, and they knew and used to talk with Adam Clayton Powell quite frequently. And that was the same time that a young man named Cassius Clay was coming out and about to announce that he was going to be Muhammad Ali. That was just in New York. And then around the country, you had people like Ralph Abernathy and Stokely Carmichael and Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks was still here. You had big names. You had Cindy Portier and Harry Belafonte helping out on different ends inside. You don't have that today. And the reason you don't have that today is that too many of our young have decided to go into the entertainment field.
Wait a minute. I'll start there. So you're saying Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion aren't the same as Malcolm X?
They are not. They are not. They can't bring it. They can't bring it that way, you know? And I think that's one of the, we have to understand where we are. And this was a good a place to juxtapose everything, Ed. You know, looking at the March of 2021 and the March of 1963, it shows a stark difference in who and where we are. Listen at all of the wonderful names that I've mentioned that were involved in some way in this march. You can't even get close to that here now. And they all, the ones that were involved in the 2021 march, they all seem to have something else to do. Like, yeah, I'll lend my name to this. I'll send $500,000 and yeah, I'll sign certain t-shirts and do this. But after that's over, I gotta leave. I got a concert in LA or whatever. They weren't totally committed like these guys in 63 were. These guys in 63 were committed like we used to do in sales training. We used to have a slogan that said, you know, you need to have pig commitment if you want to be a good salesperson. You have to be committed like a pig. So what do you mean pig commitment? So we'll think about that breakfast you had this morning, bacon and egg. The chicken was involved in your breakfast, but the pig was committed. That's the kind of commitment that these people had back then, Ed. And the one big name I didn't even mention that was behind the scene, Bayard Rustin, you know, people like that. Mm-hmm. Who is the Bayard Rustin of today?
Right.
You know, who is the James Baldwin that was writing behind things of the day? It's just a different time. We don't have the giants now.
So you know, one of the last things that King wrote about was something he called dangerous optimism. He said, you know, when you get to the point where we're able to eat at Woolworths and move into a neighborhood or whatever, we may think we have arrived and we have lost sight of what the actual goal is, which is, you know, economic equality across the board, and also not sending your kids to die in inordinate numbers, you know, to a place like Vietnam or whatever. That the goal was not just to be amongst white people, but it was to be able to take care of ourselves as much as anything else. And you know as well as I do, Val, probably even more because you were, you know, more sentient at the time because you were probably in your early 20s, but you were hearing all these things and understanding where Black people were, that we needed to be able to have generational wealth that we could pass on, that we needed to have businesses, that we needed to be fully engaged in government and all those kind of things. And then so we actually now think we have it, but we still don't. If you look at the numbers, Val, I was looking at this week about generational wealth, it's just not there. And the value of your house is less because of the zip code you live in and all these other things that still plague Black folks. But we have this inflated sense of that we have arrived because, you know, such and such is a quarterback and makes this amount of money and LeBron James has this amount of money or whatever. And it's almost like we've taken on those people's success as being success for all Black people, right? Like you mentioned earlier that we go into entertainment and I'll say sports is entertainment too, and equate that with being successful, but we don't have a Bill Gates equivalent. What is the likelihood that we can get anywhere if we don't start having people show up in those other roles as CEOs of, you know, mega corporations like a Microsoft and those kind of things?
Well, the likelihood is not very much big being there. Excuse me, Ed. Well, you know, we're going to talk on our show Connections in the coming weeks, something about uh, land ownership uh, and evictions and those kind of things, home ownership. And one of the things that has been missing and that we have run from is getting back close to the land, taking what was given to us by our forefathers, building upon that, trying something new. You know, we should take those 200 acres that grandpa left to us, and we should build us a development project there instead of selling it to the developer and let him do it. Okay. Those are the kinds of things that we are missing on now. We are a long way from Tulsa, from Wilmington, from Rosewood, and those kind of places where we had all of the Black Wall Streets, and even in Durham. We're a long way from that. We're going in a different direction. Back then, we were seeing what could we do to build up the Black dollar and Black ownership and understanding and a cooperation. And now it's getting to almost individualism. You know, individuals saying, I'm not going to go back down in Union County and live on that land that my granddaddy left me. I'm going to take this money and I'm going to buy me a townhouse in downtown Charlotte, $1 million townhouse, and I'm going to live large, you know? Well, that's what too many people are doing.
Yeah.
Stop. We got to go back the other way.
Yeah, we do. You know, one of the things that I have a piece of property in Harnett County, and I am hanging on to it for dear life. You know, because I believe even if I don't live there right now, that I will live there at some point in my golden years if I get to be golden, if I make it that long, and turn it into something where the grandkids can come and you have a homestead, right? But you know, one of the things, I was talking to a realtor recently, and they were bemoaning the fact that a lot of times Black folks who are interested in buying a home, they don't have the down payment money. But when they deal with white clients, the white client will come with not only 20% of down payment, they may come with half because mom and dad left them, you know, significant property that's shot up in value, and then they transfer that into their money that they use for, you know, their new homestead. So I'm glad you want to talk about that subject. I'm looking forward to doing that, and that's on Connections on Foxy 107, 104, where you'll be talking about that. But we'll probably talk about it here. I'd like to bring in some realtors because, like I said, the housing values are going up crazy, Val. You know this. I mean, there's some neighborhoods in Raleigh. I won't mention the exact developer. I ran into a developer here, Val, who has bought up a whole bunch of property in Southeast Raleigh. He's actually a foreigner. He is from Canada. He was born in Tanzania, but he's of Indian descent. And his son was going to NC State, and he said he was driving around Raleigh, noticed all this property, and bought up a bunch of it. And he's turning it into those $1 million townhouses that you're talking about that are in downtown Raleigh. I won't tell you the exact development, but he was like, he couldn't believe how easy it was for him to get that property from people, that people were so willing to give it to him. And he said, give it to him. He said, because the price that now he's able to charge for these townhouses is astronomical. They're in the $1 million range, where people gave up houses for $40,000 and $50,000. It's incredible, Val, and it's something that we need to talk about. Look, you're watching The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. There's a whole bunch going on in the world. We wanted in this segment to talk about the March on Washington, because I think, like I said, we have to rethink, Val, how we approach some of this stuff. The last census numbers, I'm still going through those. For Black folks, and we'll end up the segment on this, for Black folks, we're not number 2 anymore, right? It used to be, you could always say, where there's white folks and there's black folks, and then there's a few of these other people. But clearly now there's a whole bunch of people who identify as Hispanic on the census, and there's more of them than identify as black people. And then right below that are these Asians, and they're from a lot of places. They're from India, they're from China, they're from Japan, a lot of places, and they're nipping on the heels of black folks. What does that mean in terms of how we view this going forward? Does that also make it harder for us to have these conversations about asking for equality for black folks when somebody says, well, what about the brown people? What about the people from, Asia? What's special about you? Because a lot of young white people have no context about Martin Luther King, really, other than the I Have a Dream speech.
That is so right on and spot on, Ed. We need to recalibrate our thinking about where we are and who we are in the whole pantheon and the whole mixture, the melting pot that we call America. We got to figure out that we've got to come up with a strategy that's void of asking for sympathy. Can't do that anymore. You got to get into a spot where you know who you are, you know what you are, and you grasp upon that and you move forward. Jewish population is much, much smaller than we are. They convinced other Western nations to give them their own country. So it ain't that we don't have enough people. We got over 40 million people, although we're number 3, there are over 40 million of us. That's more than the total population of Canada. Canada doesn't have as many people as there are African Americans in this particular country. So it's not the number. If we were a separate country, we would be number 11 as the richest country in the world, if you'd add all of our monies and our wealth together. And out of the 242 countries that are listed, we would be number 11. So the means are there, the motivation is not. And so what we've got to start doing is figure out who we are, where we are vis-a-vis everybody else. And the big billion-dollar question is, what do we want to do with it? What do we want to do about it going forward?
Well, you know what? That's a good place to take a break. When we come back, 9/11 is coming up. And Val is going to explain to me in the 20 years since 9/11, what have we learned? And what do we expect now that we're out of Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. And then we'll probably also make some time to talk about COVID-19 and where we are with that. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
You're gonna know how bad it could be. You could be as healthy as an ox, and it could still wipe you out. And so the differences between getting vaccinated and maybe having COVID later are significantly rare. We're talking about less than 1% of cases we're seeing today where people may get COVID. But the difference really is that if you get COVID and you're vaccinated, it's generally asymptomatic or very mild. Whereas if you weren't vaccinated, you could be on a respirator for a couple of weeks and, of course, possibly die. And at that point, it's too late to even get the vaccine. I have colleagues, I have patients, and they're saying, look, it's too late to even give you that shot. We got to put you on a respirator. And it's sad, and it's preventable. So that's the difference now, is that if you're unvaccinated, you're putting this risk that we know that COVID has with some of the minimal risks that we see with a vaccine that can prevent death and hospitalizations.
Towers, a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. We were talking about protests in the last segment, and where do we go from here with that? And there's a lot of work to be done, and we're going to revisit that on a lot of occasions going forward. Where do we go as Black folks? Because last time I looked in the mirror, I was colored, and I think Val is too. So we have an affinity for this subject, we want to try to get us in a better place. But what you saw immediately coming back in from the break is some scenes from 9/11. The anniversary is coming up this week. Val, I remember distinctly sitting on the couch, had turned on the news. I was on the phone with a friend who has since passed. And I was talking about going to New York because I had been chosen to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So I was excited about going to New York and was supposed to be flying to New York that week in the coming days to be on the program. I think it was a Tuesday morning when this happened. I was supposed to be in New York on Thursday to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And of course, that did not happen. We saw the planes flying to the building and all hell broke loose over that week. All flights stopped for a while. And then our lives changed in ways that, could not have imagined. Talk to me real quick about your memory of that morning of 9/11, and then we'll deal with the aftermath.
Yeah, I remember vividly, Ed. I was in my bedroom getting dressed, of course, watching TV as I walked back and forth from the closet to the restroom and trying to do things. And I had an appointment at Foxy 107, 104 with the general manager to talk about some things about the show. And so I wasn't really paying that much attention to the television until the news broke that a plane had just crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers. And I said, oh my goodness, this is horrible. So I called one of my golfing buddies and we were talking about it. And as we were talking about it on the phone, the second plane crashed into the tower. And I told him, I said, Tony, this is not an accident. We are having a attack on American soil. And I said, I'll see you later, buddy. So we hung up. I called the management at the radio station and he said, look, let's not meet today. A lot of stuff going on and let's just hunker in place and those sorts of things. But that's where I was and that's what I remember. But I knew when that second plane hit that it was all planned. And then the news started coming in about the Pentagon and about the plane still flying in Pennsylvania, headed back to Washington and those kinds of things. And I found out that that was the deal. But it didn't become relevant and interesting as much to me until we start unraveling things and found out that those 19 guys were all Saudis and the role that bin Laden played in this. And then you can conjure back up the attempt at the World Trade Center when they tried to blow it up from the basement level once, and that was not successful. And they had done something with the USS Cole, and they were really on a mission to bring down this behemoth, this monster called the United States of America.
Yeah,
well, because we had touted ourselves as being, we are the new Roman Empire, and not only are people afraid of us, but even if they weren't, they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the stuff about the U.S. Cole and all in the earlier bombing attempt because they're all related, right? Osama bin Laden was mad that the United States didn't do what it said it was going to do, which was to get the hell out of the way in Afghanistan and Pakistan and let them do what they wanted to do. That they appreciated their help when they helped get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Soviets had been there for 9 years and decided to pack up because the United States started supplying Stinger missiles, and now they were shooting Russian planes out of the air. And the Russians said, "Oh hell no, we're not that committed that we can let this go. These folks are not going to get us what we need to anyway because there's not a lot of resources in Afghanistan. It's a strategic place. It's not a resource place. So the Soviets decided to pull out. So Osama bin Laden thinks that America, again, thanks for your help, but you're not going to be a part of this. You're not going to stick around and add us to your empire, right? And so that's why so quickly after it happened, the CIA and everybody knew exactly who did it. They knew within hours that they were Saudis attached to Al Qaeda, back to bin Laden. So the question for you, Mr. Professor, put on your professor hat, if you were trying to teach this in the history, what would you say was the precipitating event for 9/11? Because we went everywhere around where I think we should have gone to get an answer. We didn't go to Saudi Arabia. We went to Afghanistan and we went to Iraq. Explain that, Mr. Professor.
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question right there. What we did was try to connect a lot of things to make logical and make sense out of what we really wanted to do, because what we really wanted to do didn't make a lot of sense. If you look at the geographical map of the Middle East, this country called Iraq is right in the dead center. And Dick Cheney and a lot of other people knew that if we ever wanted to get a foothold in the Middle East, we needed to somehow take control of Iraq, because we could have American troops then on the border of all of these other countries. And in some way, whenever we got ready to control them as well. So it was going to be an attack on Iraq, regardless of what the facts said. The facts said that Osama bin Laden was involved, and it was 19 Saudis, and he financed it and so forth. And they used Afghanistan and Pakistan as training bases and all of this other kind of stuff. Iraq had nothing to do with it. And Dick Cheney says, well, that's your side of the story. My side of the story is that, yes, Saddam Hussein had something to do with it, and he's got weapons of mass destruction, and we need to go in and get our pound of flesh for what he did in 9/11. And then you start pulling on the emotional strings of the people of the United States and talking about our wonderful first responders and how brave they were, and all the people that got killed, and the life stories of the 2,700 people that died in that awful mess, and the cowardly attacks on innocent people. And, you're just building up the emotional story so that whatever you do in response to that can be accepted. Going into a country that had nothing to do with 9/11 and taking it over and killing anybody that disagreed with you.
So you're trying to say that we're suckers and we got played by people like Dick Cheney, who had been the head of Halliburton, who ended up making multi-billions of dollars as contractors in the Middle East. Are you saying that we were just suckered into that, right?
We're not only suckered into it, I'm mad about it because he used one of my heroes to help sucker us into that. That's General Colin Powell. He went to the UN and told them that they had evidence. And if you look at those clips when Powell was talking to the United Nations, you had a couple of CIA and State Department people sitting behind Colin Powell with looks on their faces that said it all. Keep talking, Colin. Just you saying the right thing. You got it. I mean, their eyes and everything else said they knew Colin was lying, and they knew he was unwitting, complicit in that whole piece. Yeah. And they used him, and I really got mad about that.
Well, Val, there's the Netflix series that's on right now about 9/11. I'll recommend it to people. It seems to be right down the middle of the road. It's not making any value judgments about anything. It's showing stuff that I don't think people have ever seen. It shows American officials in Afghanistan helping the Taliban before 9/11. It shows Osama bin Laden being interviewed by Western news agencies saying, well, you know what, thanks a lot, but you guys promised to leave. So you need to get these CIA people out of the area. And if you don't, there'll be retribution. And so, again, it shows why we knew for a fact that Osama bin Laden was the person who was responsible for the 9/11 attacks so quickly. It's because he had telegraphed it. There's declassified information that's starting to come out now. The Biden administration is going to declassify even more, but there's stuff coming out right now that shows in the weeks leading up to 9/11, the White House was clear that something was being planned using planes. And that's why they were able to figure it out so quickly. But again, they did something completely different, which is go to Iraq and Afghanistan, which didn't make any sense to me. So on the program next week, we're going to deal a lot more into that. And I want to try to get some archival footage of some of that stuff that you probably never seen before. Let's switch gears, Val. I don't want to run out of time. There was something that happened this week also. It's always a big news week in America, it seems, but the storm, Hurricane Ida, it ripped through Louisiana. Louisiana is a complete mess. And I want to hold on just a second. I want to show you some of the footage from Louisiana.
In Lafitte, houses are only home to heartbreak. Those who could afford to lose the least have lost the most.
It's the elderly community, and look, a lot of them don't have it, don't have the energy, and in this heat, if you could help us, we could use it. We really could use it.
5 days after the storm, these are the lines for the basics. In scorching heat, tens of thousands still don't have power.
So, Val, there's whole towns that are flattened in Louisiana, but then the storm kept moving, and it hit Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. For the first time ever, New York had a flash flood warning, or actually had flash floods. Closed the subway system. A lot of things happened. And there's two lessons, I think, in this. I think people know that I used to be a spokesperson for this organization called FEMA. and I would be the person that would stand up there next to the governor and talk about what FEMA was going to do to help out. But one of the things that I know is that these storms seem to be much worse. They've been getting progressively worse, but they're getting worse because of climate. The weather is telling us that stuff ain't right and we need to do something about it. And two, we haven't come up with a better approach to dealing with these storms, because a lot of it, if you had better infrastructure, then you could recover quicker. Now, infrastructure has been talked about. The infrastructure bills have been passed in the House and Senate, so on and so forth. There's still not enough. America has terrible infrastructure. Talk to me real quick about, one, the storm in general, and two, this whole notion of climate and what we need to do for infrastructure.
Well, I think we're all very lucky and fortunate that the storm didn't end up causing more deaths than it did. And we're sorry about those deaths that did occur. But it was unbelievable hard hitting in Louisiana. Everybody was prepared for the levees to be breached, and that didn't happen. But they never saw a storm come in at that velocity, over 150 miles per hour when it hit shore. So, and it spawned tornadoes and all sorts of things. So, and the amount of rain that it brought and the storm surge throughout the bodies of water there was just too much for some. And although the levees didn't break, there were still communities there with 3-4 feet of water that people had to deal with. The only way to get out of their house was by boat. But I think that the majority of loss of life occurred in the Northeast. And normally a hurricane loses strength as it moves over land. And this one did lose strength as a hurricane, but it brought tremendous downpouring of rain with it when it started hitting places like you mentioned Maryland and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And it really caused havoc. But many people, yours truly included, say that the havoc that was caused may have been a little less severe had we not done to the environment what we've been doing over the last 100 or 200 years. And it's an environmental tragedy that we've allowed the planet to be used for money-making purposes as we have, Ed. And we're going to cause the planet to strike back at us. And when it strikes back, Mother Nature knows how to win. I think we're in treacherous, dangerous territory here as we play these economic money games with the survival of the planet, which means our own survival. And that's all it is an economic money game, because we have made a decision that is more important for our way of life and our culture and our lifestyle to keep using fossil fuel and those kinds of things. It's more important to do that than to change and do things a different way to save the planet and maybe knock us off our perch as being the #1 country as far as economics and military might goes. So that's what it really boils down to. It's tough for us to do that. Asking a guy like the Coke guy, the Coke guy now, because
the other brother died.
Asking him to change his ways.
Mm-hmm.
Asking people in Halliburton and a lot of other places, the people in BP across the water and Exxon, and it's tough asking those guys to give up the billions that they are raking in every year to save the third rock from the sun.
Right. Well, because they can always get on their private spacecraft that they're trying to build, so they can get off of here, right? And they can go settle on Mars or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a Twilight Zone episode right now. Anyway, Val, look, we're starting to run out of time. One last thing before we wrap it up. COVID-19 is still killing a lot of people. Next week, I do want to spend a little more time on that. But I do want to bring up the fact that a lot of right-wing talk show hosts are dropping dead. I heard in the last few days that Joe Rogan, who's a very popular, he may have the most popular podcast in the United States, comedian. He also runs UFC, Ultimate Fighting, has come down with COVID, but he got on, Val, and started talking about taking ivermectin, the deworming drug, taking monoclonal antibodies, which is something that we do know that helps, but everybody can't get access to it because there's not a lot of doses of it. And they usually only give it to people who have, or supposed to give it to people who have conditions like cancer or diabetes or whatever. Joe Rogan clearly doesn't have either one of the two, but he has a lot of money. And so did Donald Trump. And so did Governor Abbott. And so did Rudy Giuliani. And so did all these Republicans took monoclonal antibodies and got the best treatment possible while their constituents are dying. I keep seeing story after story of person who was vehemently against vaccination on their deathbed having a conversion and asking people to get vaccinated. Talk to me real quick about where we are with that, and will there be enough deaths, to convince the very far fringe to go ahead and get vaccinated?
I don't know if it'll be enough, Ed, because you got some of these far fringe, as you like to call them, people who made the decision not to get vaccinated based on religious beliefs, based on political beliefs, and a lot of other things. And you can come up with all of the information and data and example and statistics we want to show them why it's to their benefit and to their family's benefit to take this. And they got closed ears. They ain't listening to that. because they think that it's all a game being played and being run on them by the Democrats and left-wing progressives and that sort of thing, just trying to take away their ability or right to choose. So let them choose the way they want. One of the things I don't understand is how right-wing Republican politicians are continuing to let this happen, because the people that are being lost are the people that were likely to vote for them. They're losing voters. It doesn't make sense. But I don't, to answer your question directly, I don't think this is going to change their minds and make them come and see the error of their way. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Well, that looks like a good place for us to end this. Tell me something good, Val. Tell me what you're working on or something we got to look forward to in the coming week.
Well, tomorrow morning, there's another edition of Connections with Val Atkinson, Ed Clark, and Irv Joyner. Every 2 weeks, you find us there. And we are talking about some of the same things that you and I have been discussing here this morning. And I encourage people to tune in, 8 o'clock, Foxy 107, 104. You can pick it up, go to your internet and pull up Radio 1, find Foxy 107, 104, click on it and listen live. 8 a.m., folks, Eastern Standard Time.
Yep. Yeah, I do encourage folks to do that. Go and listen live to that. It's always a good time. And of course, having Irv Joyner on there, a professor of law at North Carolina Central University, really helps out, because otherwise you don't want to listen to Val and I talk about law. I tell you what, folks, thanks so much for spending this hour with us. We're going to be back next week. We want to talk in depth about 9/11, the 20th anniversary of that. So in the meantime, go out and do something good for somebody today, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.
We're cold.